The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of Buckingham Palace as tourists gathered behind the iron gates, cameras ready to capture the famous changing of the guard ceremony. Among the crowd stood Staff Sergeant Michael Thompson, a decorated United States Marine on his first vacation in 15 years. His weathered hands gripped a simple digital camera, a gift from his daughter before his deployment to Afghanistan 3 tours ago. Michael had earned his rest. 3 Purple Hearts, 2 Bronze Stars, and countless sleepless nights in the mountains of Kandahar had carved deep lines into his face, though he was only 34 years old. His wife Sarah had practically forced him to take this European vacation, threatening to hide his military gear if he didn't agree to some proper time off. London was their compromise. She wanted Paris. He wanted to stay home and work on his motorcycle. As the crowd pressed closer to the palace gates, Michael noticed something that made his trained eye narrow. A man in a dark coat was moving through the tourists in an unusual pattern, his hands checking his pockets repeatedly. The man's eyes darted nervously between the palace guards and the crowd, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool October morning. The royal guard stood motionless in their iconic red tunics and black bearskin hats, their faces expressionless as stone. These weren't just ceremonial soldiers, Michael knew. Behind those stoic expressions were highly trained members of the British military, each one selected for their exceptional discipline and combat readiness. Their rifles might look like parade weapons to tourists, but Michael recognized the subtle signs of men ready for action. Lance Corporal James Windsor had been standing guard for 2 hours, his body perfectly still except for the occasional blink. 26 years old and built like a marathon runner, James had served 2 tours in Iraq before earning his position in the Queen's Guard. His peripheral vision caught every movement in the crowd, every face, every potential threat. Years of training had taught him to remain alert while appearing completely detached from his surroundings. The nervous man in the dark coat was now only 20 feet from the palace gates, his behavior becoming more erratic. Michael's instincts, honed by countless patrols in hostile territory, screamed danger. He began moving through the crowd, his movements casual but purposeful, keeping his eyes on the suspicious individual while trying not to alarm the other tourists. James noticed the American tourists changed behavior immediately. Something about the man's military bearing and the way he moved suggested professional training. The tourist was tracking the same individual that had caught James's attention 5 minutes earlier. A silent understanding passed between the 2 warriors, though neither had spoken a word or even made direct eye contact. The man in the dark coat suddenly stopped, his hand reaching inside his jacket. The movement was quick, but not quite quick enough to escape the notice of 2 highly trained military minds. Michael was already moving, his vacation forgotten as muscle memory took over. James remained perfectly still, but his grip on his rifle shifted almost imperceptibly, ready to act if needed. What happened next would be talked about in military circles for years to come, though the tourists present would never fully understand what they had witnessed. 2 soldiers from different nations with different training and different rules of engagement were about to demonstrate that brotherhood in arms transcends all borders. The crowd continued chatting and taking photos, completely unaware that they were about to witness something extraordinary. Children tugged at their parents' sleeves asking when the guards would move. Elderly couples compared this ceremony to ones they had seen decades ago. Young backpackers live-streamed the moment to friends back home. Michael closed the distance to the suspicious man, his mind calculating angles and possibilities. He had no authority here, no backup and no weapon except his bare hands and years of combat experience. But he also had something else, the absolute certainty that whatever this man was planning, it needed to be stopped. James watched the American tourist approach the potential threat, admiring the man's tactical awareness and courage. In different circumstances, he might have been forced to detain both individuals, but his training told him that the American was military, possibly special forces based on his movement patterns. The situation was about to unfold, and James prepared himself for whatever came next. The nervous man's hand emerged from his jacket, and time seemed to slow as both Michael and James prepared to act. The morning that had started as a simple tourist outing was about to become something much more significant, a moment that would test the limits of duty, courage, and international cooperation in the most unexpected of circumstances. Michael's world narrowed to a single point of focus as the suspicious man's hand emerged from his jacket. What appeared wasn't a weapon, but something almost as concerning. A small device with wires visible, clutched in trembling fingers. The man's eyes were wild now, darting between the palace and the crowd of innocent tourists surrounding him. Without hesitation, Michael stepped forward and placed his hand firmly on the man's wrist. "Easy there, friend," he said in a calm voice that carried the authority of someone accustomed to life-or-death situations. "Let's talk about whatever's bothering you." The man spun around, startled by the sudden contact. He was younger than Michael had initially thought, maybe 22 or 23, with the pale complexion and nervous energy of someone who had spent too many hours online in dark forums. His eyes were bloodshot, suggesting he hadn't slept in days. "You don't understand," the young man whispered, his voice cracking. "They need to know. The world needs to know the truth about what they're hiding in there." His grip on the device tightened, and Michael could see his finger hovering over what appeared to be a button. James watched this exchange while maintaining his rigid posture, but his mind was racing. Protocol demanded he alert his commanding officer immediately, but doing so would require breaking his ceremonial stance and potentially escalating the situation. The American tourist was handling things with remarkable skill, treating this as a negotiation rather than a takedown. The crowd around them continued taking photos, most completely oblivious to the drama unfolding just feet away. A few tourists noticed the intense conversation and began recording with their phones, thinking they were capturing some kind of planned interaction between a visitor and a local character. Michael recognized the signs immediately. This wasn't a hardened terrorist or enemy combatant. This was a troubled young man who had likely been radicalized online, filled with conspiracy theories, and convinced that dramatic action was his only option. Michael had encountered similar individuals during his time stateside, usually at military recruitment centers or government buildings. "What's your name, son?" Michael asked, shifting his position slightly to block the young man from the view of most tourists while keeping his own body between the device and the crowd. "Marcus," the young man replied, surprised by the question. "Marcus Webb." "Well, Marcus, I'm Mike. I can see you're upset about something, and I'd like to help you figure this out. But first, I need you to help me understand what that device is supposed to do." Marcus glanced down at the object in his hands, then back at the palace. "It's a signal booster. I've been monitoring their communications for months. They're planning something, and the people deserve to know." James nearly smiled despite the seriousness of the situation. The young man wasn't carrying a bomb or weapon. He was holding what appeared to be a homemade electronic surveillance device. Still dangerous in its own way, but not the immediate physical threat they had initially assumed. Michael nodded thoughtfully, as if Marcus had just shared something perfectly reasonable. "That's impressive technical work, Marcus. Must have taken you a long time to build something like that, but here's the thing. I'm guessing you didn't get permission to use that equipment here, did you?" The question seemed to deflate Marcus slightly. "They wouldn't give me permission. They never listened to people like me. That's why I had to do this myself." "I understand that frustration," Michael said, and he genuinely meant it. "Sometimes it feels like the only way to get anyone's attention is to do something dramatic. But Marcus, look around at all these families, these kids taking pictures. Is this really the place to make your point?" For the first time, Marcus seemed to notice the tourists surrounding them. A small girl with pigtails was standing just 10 feet away, grinning toothlessly as her father lifted her up for a better view of the guards. An elderly couple from Japan was carefully posing for photos, the woman adjusting her husband's hat with tender care. James observed Marcus's expression soften as he took in the innocent scene around him. The young man's radical rhetoric was wavering. In the face of simple human kindness and normal family moments, this was exactly the kind of de-escalation technique they taught in advanced training. But the American was executing it flawlessly, without any formal authority or backup. "I never meant to hurt anyone," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible above the chatter of tourists. "I just wanted someone to listen." "I'm listening now," Michael said firmly. "And I promise you, Marcus, there are better ways to get your message out there. Legal ways that won't land you in prison or put innocent people at risk." The device in Marcus's hands was no longer pointing toward the palace. His finger had moved away from the activation button, though he still held it tightly. Progress, Michael thought, but they weren't out of danger yet. James made a subtle gesture with his eyes, catching the attention of his partner stationed at the next post. Without moving his head or breaking his ceremonial posture, he communicated that backup should be quietly alerted, but not in a way that would spook the young man or create panic among the tourists. The morning sun climbed higher, and the normal rhythm of the changing of the guard ceremony continued around them. Most visitors remained unaware that they were witnessing something far more significant than the usual tourist attraction. A masterclass in crisis negotiation being conducted by a Marine on vacation and observed by one of Britain's finest soldiers. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife, though most of the tourists remained blissfully unaware of the drama unfolding before their eyes. Michael could feel sweat forming on his palms despite the cool morning air, but his voice remained steady and calm as he continued talking to Marcus. "Tell me about this monitoring you've been doing," Michael said, genuinely curious now. "How did you learn to build surveillance equipment?" Marcus's eyes lit up slightly at the question, the first sign of enthusiasm Michael had seen from him. "I studied electrical engineering at university before I dropped out. Started with simple radio scanners, then moved on to digital signal processing. It's all about understanding frequency patterns and encryption methods." James was impressed despite himself. The young man clearly possessed significant technical skills, which made him potentially more dangerous but also suggested he wasn't entirely unhinged. Intelligent individuals who felt ignored or marginalized often made the worst mistakes when they finally decided to act. "That's impressive work," Michael said, and he meant it. "I've worked with some military communications specialists who would respect that kind of knowledge. But Marcus, what exactly do you think you've discovered? What's this truth you mentioned?" Marcus glanced nervously at the palace, then back at Michael. "They're coordinating with foreign intelligence agencies, planning operations that bypass Parliament entirely. I've intercepted fragments of communications that prove they're working outside legal channels." Michael nodded thoughtfully, while mentally cataloging the red flags in Marcus's statement. Conspiracy theories often contained kernels of misunderstood truth, wrapped in layers of paranoia and misinterpretation. The challenge was helping Marcus see reality without dismissing his concerns entirely. "Let me ask you something, Marcus. In your engineering studies, did you learn about signal interference and false positives in surveillance systems?" The question seemed to catch Marcus off guard. "Of course, that's basic troubleshooting. Why?" "Well, I'm just wondering if you've considered that some of those communication fragments might be routine security protocols or scheduled international cooperation. Palace security works with lots of agencies. It's part of keeping everyone safe." James watched as understanding began to dawn in Marcus's eyes. The young man was intelligent enough to recognize the logical holes in his own theory when they were presented clearly and without judgment. "But I've been so careful," Marcus protested, though his voice lacked the conviction it had carried earlier. "I've documented everything, cross-referenced timing patterns." "I'm sure you have," Michael replied, "and that kind of detailed work shows real dedication. But Marcus, even the most sophisticated surveillance can miss context. You're seeing pieces of a puzzle without knowing what the complete picture looks like." A group of school children walked past, their teacher pointing out the different elements of the guards' uniforms and explaining the history of the ceremony. Their innocent chatter provided a stark contrast to the serious conversation happening just feet away. Marcus watched the children with something approaching wonder, as if seeing them for the first time. "I've been staying awake for days, analyzing signals, building theories. Maybe I haven't been thinking clearly." "When did you last eat a proper meal?" Michael asked gently. The question seemed to surprise Marcus. "I don't know. Yesterday? Maybe the day before." Michael nodded knowingly. He had seen similar behavior in soldiers who had been deployed too long without adequate rest or nutrition. Isolation and sleep deprivation could turn small concerns into massive conspiracies in the human mind. James noted how masterfully the American was handling the situation. Rather than attacking Marcus's beliefs directly, he was addressing the underlying conditions that had allowed those beliefs to flourish. It was psychological warfare in reverse. Instead of breaking down an enemy, he was rebuilding a troubled civilian. "Marcus, I want you to do something for me," Michael said, his voice taking on a slightly more authoritative tone. "I want you to slowly hand me that device, and then we're going to walk over to that cafe across the street. You're going to have a proper breakfast while we talk about better ways to channel your technical skills." For a moment, Marcus hesitated, his grip tightening on the device. This was the crucial moment. Would he trust this stranger enough to give up his planned dramatic gesture? James tensed almost imperceptibly, ready to act if the situation went wrong. His training had taught him to prepare for multiple scenarios simultaneously, and he was mentally rehearsing the steps he would need to take if Marcus became violent or tried to run. The morning crowd continued to swell as more tourists arrived for the ceremony. Street vendors began setting up their stalls, selling postcards and toy soldiers to eager visitors. London was waking up around them, completely unaware that the fate of dozens of innocent people hung in the balance of one young man's decision. "Will you really listen to me?" Marcus asked, his voice small and uncertain. "Will you help me figure out what I should do with what I've learned?" Michael looked him straight in the eye, recognizing the desperate need for validation and guidance that had driven this entire situation. "I give you my word, Marcus. We'll go through everything you've collected, and I'll help you find the right people to contact if there's really something worth investigating." The device changed hands slowly, Marcus releasing it with obvious reluctance but clear relief. As Michael secured the device in his jacket pocket, he felt James's approving gaze from across the courtyard, though the guard's expression remained perfectly neutral to any casual observer. As Michael guided Marcus away from the palace gates, James faced a dilemma that would test every aspect of his training and judgment. Protocol clearly stated that any security incident, no matter how minor, should be reported immediately through proper channels. But the American tourist had just performed a textbook de-escalation that had resolved the situation without panic, arrests, or international incident. James watched the two men walk toward the cafe across the street, noting how Michael maintained a protective position between Marcus and the crowd, while keeping the young man engaged in conversation. The Americans' handling of the crisis had been nothing short of masterful, displaying the kind of tactical awareness and psychological insight that James recognized from his own Special Forces training. The weight of decision pressed on James's shoulders as heavily as his ceremonial uniform. Breaking protocol could end his career, but blindly following rules might create problems where none needed to exist. The young man clearly needed help, not imprisonment, and the American seemed uniquely qualified to provide that guidance. Meanwhile, in the small cafe across from the palace, Michael was learning more about Marcus Webb than he had expected. Over a full English breakfast that Marcus attacked with the hunger of someone who had forgotten to eat for days, the young man's story began to emerge. "I lost my job 6 months ago," Marcus explained between bites of sausage and eggs. "Budget cuts at the tech company where I worked. Since then, I've been living in my flat, freelancing when I can, but mostly just diving deeper and deeper into online research." Michael recognized the pattern immediately. Isolation, unemployment, and too much time spent in internet echo chambers created the perfect breeding ground for conspiracy theories and radical thinking. "What kind of work were you doing before?" Michael asked, genuinely interested in understanding how a skilled engineer had ended up planning to use surveillance equipment at Buckingham Palace. "Network security analysis for financial institutions," Marcus replied. "I was good at it too. Maybe too good. I started seeing patterns everywhere, security vulnerabilities that others missed. When I lost the job, I guess I just kept looking for patterns even where they didn't exist." The admission was a breakthrough moment. Marcus was beginning to recognize his own role in creating the conspiracy theories that had consumed his life for the past 6 months. Michael pulled out his phone and showed Marcus a photo of his daughter. "This is Emma. She's studying computer science at university back home. Always sending me articles about cybersecurity and asking me technical questions I can't answer." Marcus smiled for the first time that morning. "She sounds smart. What does she want to do after graduation?" "Probably something like what you used to do, actually. She's passionate about protecting people's data and making sure systems are secure." The conversation was working exactly as Michael had hoped. By personalizing the discussion and showing Marcus a positive example of how technical skills could be used constructively, he was helping the young man remember his own better nature. Back at the palace, James had made his decision. Instead of filing an immediate incident report, he would wait until his shift ended and then speak directly with his commanding officer. He would recommend that Marcus be offered assistance rather than prosecution, emphasizing the successful intervention by the American tourist. It was a risk that could backfire spectacularly if higher-ups disagreed with his assessment. But James had learned to trust his instincts during 2 combat deployments, and those instincts told him that everyone involved would be better served by discretion than by strict adherence to protocol. "I've been thinking," Marcus said suddenly, putting down his fork and looking directly at Michael. "What you said about signal interference and false positives. I think maybe I've been seeing what I wanted to see instead of what was actually there." Michael nodded encouragingly. "It happens to the best analysts. When you're looking for something specific, your brain can trick you into finding patterns that support what you already believe. The thing is," Marcus continued, "I do have real skills. I could be helping to protect systems instead of trying to expose imaginary conspiracies." This was the moment Michael had been working toward. "Marcus, what if I told you that there are legitimate ways to use your surveillance and security skills to actually help people? Government agencies, private companies, even non-profit organizations that could use someone with your technical background." Marcus looked skeptical. "After what I almost did today? Who would trust me with that kind of responsibility?" Michael leaned forward, his expression serious but kind. "The fact that you're sitting here having this conversation instead of in handcuffs tells me that you made the right choice when it mattered most. Everyone deserves a second chance, especially someone smart enough to recognize their mistakes." The morning rush was beginning to pick up around them. Business people hurried past the cafe windows. Tourists consulted maps and guidebooks, and life in London continued its normal pace. Neither Michael nor Marcus realized that their conversation was being observed from across the street by a royal guard who was wrestling with his own difficult decisions. James had been thinking about his own journey from troubled young soldier to respected member of the Queen's Guard. His first deployment to Iraq had nearly broken him, leaving him angry and directionless until a senior sergeant had taken the time to help him find his way back to being the man he wanted to be. Perhaps that experience was why James found himself sympathizing with both the American tourist and the confused young man who had nearly made a terrible mistake. Sometimes the most important battles weren't fought with weapons, but with patience, understanding, and the willingness to see potential where others might only see problems. As Marcus finished his breakfast and began discussing practical steps for rebuilding his career and finding legitimate outlets for his technical skills, Michael felt a familiar satisfaction. It was the same feeling he got when a successful mission ended with everyone going home safely. Not just his own people, but everyone involved. 2 hours later, as the changing of the guard ceremony concluded and tourists began to disperse, James finally broke from his rigid posture. His replacement had arrived for the next shift, allowing him to step away from his post and process everything that had happened that morning. The American tourist and Marcus Webb were still visible through the cafe windows, their conversation appearing relaxed and constructive. James had watched intermittently throughout his remaining time on duty, noting how the dynamic between them had shifted from crisis intervention to what looked like genuine mentorship. In the guard room beneath the palace, James removed his bearskin hat and red tunic, changing into his regular duty uniform. His mind was still processing the decision he had made to delay reporting the incident. It went against every protocol he had been taught, but sometimes exceptional situations required exceptional judgment. His commanding officer, Major Patricia Henley, was reviewing shift reports when James knocked on her office door. A veteran of 3 deployments and 15 years in the British Army, Major Henley had a reputation for fairness and practical wisdom that had earned her respect throughout the regiment. "Sir, I need to discuss an incident from this morning's ceremony," James began, standing at attention. Major Henley looked up from her paperwork, noting the serious expression on her soldier's face. "At ease, Lance Corporal. What happened?" James recounted the morning's events in precise detail, from his initial observation of Marcus's suspicious behavior to the American tourist's intervention and the peaceful resolution. He emphasized the skill and professionalism displayed by the civilian, who had prevented what could have become a significant security incident. You chose not to immediately alert security during the incident? Major Henley asked, her tone neutral but probing. Yes, sir. The American appeared to have military training and was handling the situation effectively. Intervening at that point might have escalated rather than resolved the crisis. Major Henley leaned back in her chair, considering the implications. A less experienced officer might have been angry about the protocol breach, but she had learned that good soldiers sometimes had to make difficult judgment calls in real-time situations. Tell me about this American tourist. What made you believe he had military training? James described Michael's movement patterns, tactical awareness, and psychological approach to dealing with Marcus. His bearing and methodology suggested special operations background, possibly Marine Force reconnaissance or similar elite unit. Meanwhile, across the street, Michael was helping Marcus create a practical plan for rebuilding his life. They had spent the morning reviewing Marcus's technical portfolio, identifying marketable skills, and discussing legitimate career opportunities in cybersecurity. The first step is getting you back on a normal schedule, Michael explained. Regular meals, proper sleep, and some kind of physical activity to clear your head. Everything else builds from there. Marcus nodded, looking more hopeful than he had in months. I can't believe I almost threw everything away over theories that probably weren't even real. What if you hadn't been there this morning? But I was there, Michael replied firmly. And more importantly, when it counted, you chose to listen rather than act recklessly. That tells me you're fundamentally a good person who just got lost for a while. The conversation was interrupted by a polite knock on their cafe table. Both men looked up to see a woman in civilian clothes, but something about her bearing suggested military background. Excuse me, gentlemen. I'm Major Henley with the Household Division. Might I have a word? Michael immediately recognized military authority, though he was puzzled about how they had been located. Marcus went pale, clearly fearing that his actions had finally caught up with him. Of course, Major, Michael replied, standing respectfully. I'm Michael Thompson, United States Marine Corps. Major Henley nodded acknowledgement, then turned to Marcus. Mr. Webb, I understand you had some equipment with you this morning that caused concern. Marcus swallowed hard but met her eyes directly. Yes, ma'am. But I want you to know that I never intended to hurt anyone. I was confused and made poor choices. I appreciate your honesty, Major Henley said, sitting down at their table. What I'm more interested in discussing is how this situation was resolved without incident, injury, or international complications. She looked directly at Michael. Lance Corporal Windsor observed your handling of this crisis from his post. His report suggests that you demonstrated exceptional tactical judgment and psychological insight. Michael felt a surge of respect for the British soldier who had been watching from across the courtyard. Your man showed real professionalism in allowing the situation to develop naturally, rather than escalating it unnecessarily. That's exactly what I wanted to discuss. Major Henley continued. Mr. Webb, you clearly possess significant technical skills that could be put to better use. We have cybersecurity consulting positions within our organization that might interest you, provided you're willing to undergo proper vetting and training. Marcus looked stunned. You're offering me a job? After what I almost did? I'm offering you a chance to prove that this morning represented poor judgment, rather than fundamental character flaws, Major Henley clarified. The final decision would depend on background checks, psychological evaluation, and your performance during a probationary period. Michael smiled, recognizing the wisdom in Major Henley's approach. Instead of punishment, she was offering redemption through service, the same opportunity that the military had given countless young people who had lost their way. There's one condition, Major Henley added, turning back to Michael. I'd like you to consider serving as a consultant during Mr. Webb's evaluation period. Your intervention this morning prevented what could have become a serious international incident, and I believe your continued involvement would benefit everyone concerned. The request caught Michael completely off guard. His vacation was supposed to be a break from military responsibilities, but the opportunity to help Marcus complete his transformation from potential threat to productive citizen was compelling. 3 weeks later, Michael found himself in an unexpected position. What had begun as a simple vacation to London had evolved into the most rewarding assignment of his military career. Even though it wasn't officially an assignment at all, Major Henley had arranged for him to work with British military psychologists and security experts in developing a new protocol for handling potential threats who might be suffering from mental health issues, rather than representing genuine security risks. Marcus Webb had become their first test case. The young engineer was thriving under the structured program that combined psychological counseling, technical training, and gradually increasing responsibility. His natural intelligence and genuine remorse for his previous actions had impressed everyone involved in his evaluation. The difference is remarkable, Dr. Elizabeth Chen, the military psychologist overseeing Marcus's case, explained to Michael during one of their weekly review meetings. 3 weeks ago, he was isolated, paranoid, and convinced that dramatic action was his only option. Now he's actively contributing to cybersecurity initiatives and helping us identify potential vulnerabilities in our systems. Michael nodded, pleased but not entirely surprised by Marcus's progress. He was never fundamentally broken, just lost in looking for purpose. Sometimes people need to feel useful more than they need to be punished. The real revelation had been the collaboration between Michael and Lance Corporal James Windsor. After Major Henley had formally introduced them, the two soldiers had discovered an immediate mutual respect that transcended national boundaries and service rivalries. "Your tactical assessment that morning was spot on," Michael told James over lunch at a pub near the palace. "A less experienced soldier might have escalated the situation and turned it into a disaster." James smiled, still somewhat amazed by how events had unfolded. "I have to admit, I was prepared to tackle him if your approach hadn't worked. Watching you de-escalate that situation was like observing a masterclass in crisis intervention." Their friendship had developed quickly, built on shared experiences of military service and a mutual understanding of the weight that came with protecting civilian lives. James had served in Iraq, Michael in Afghanistan, but the challenges of maintaining vigilance while preserving humanity were universal. Marcus's transformation had become something of a legend within the small circle of people who knew the full story. His technical skills, freed from the paranoia and isolation that had nearly destroyed his life, were proving invaluable to legitimate security operations. "I've been thinking about that morning," Marcus said during one of his regular check-ins with Michael. "What if you had just walked past like everyone else? What if that guard had decided to detain me immediately? Everything could have gone so differently." "But it didn't," Michael replied, "and that's what matters now. You made the right choice when it counted. And everyone involved chose to see your potential rather than just your mistakes." The success of Marcus's rehabilitation had attracted attention from other military and law enforcement organizations interested in developing similar programs. The approach of treating certain security incidents as mental health crises rather than criminal acts was gaining support among progressive military leaders. Major Henley had been fielding calls from American military psychologists, Canadian security experts, and even civilian law enforcement agencies wanting to learn about the protocols they were developing. "What we're discovering," she explained to Michael during one of their planning sessions, "is that a significant percentage of potential security threats are actually troubled individuals who could be redirected toward productive purposes with the right intervention." The program wasn't without its critics. Some senior officers argued that any breach of security protocol should be met with immediate and severe consequences, regardless of the perpetrator's mental state or potential for rehabilitation. But the results were speaking for themselves. Marcus had not only become a valuable asset to British cybersecurity efforts, but his case study was helping military psychologists better understand how social media isolation and conspiracy theories could radicalize otherwise intelligent and patriotic individuals. The most important lesson, Dr. Chen noted in her preliminary report, is that early intervention and appropriate mentorship can prevent troubled individuals from progressing to actual violence. In this case, the combination of tactical awareness, psychological insight, and genuine compassion achieved results that traditional law enforcement approaches might not have accomplished. Michael's wife, Sarah, had initially been frustrated when his vacation was extended, but her attitude changed when she learned about the work he was doing. Their phone conversations revealed her pride in his involvement with something that was helping people rather than just eliminating threats. "You sound different," she told him during one of their evening calls. Lighter somehow. Like you're remembering why you joined the Marines in the first place. James had a similar conversation with his own family. His parents had raised him to believe in the importance of service and protecting others, but they had sometimes worried that military life was making him too hard, too focused on enemies and threats. This project is reminding me that our real job isn't just to fight bad guys, he explained to his father during a weekend visit home. Sometimes it's to help confused people find their way back to being good guys. The collaboration between American and British military approaches had produced insights that neither nation might have developed independently. Michael's direct practical style complemented James's more structured, protocol-oriented training, creating an effective partnership that was being studied by military leaders on both sides of the Atlantic. As the program entered its second month, everyone involved began to realize that what had started as an isolated incident at Buckingham Palace was evolving into something much larger and more significant. 6 months after that fateful morning at Buckingham Palace, the ripple effects of a single act of compassion had spread far beyond what anyone could have imagined. The Thompson-Windsor Protocol, as it had come to be known in military circles, was being implemented by security forces across Europe and North America. Michael stood in the briefing room at the Pentagon, addressing a gathering of senior military officers, psychologists, and security experts from 12 different countries. The presentation he was giving would have seemed impossible to imagine during his vacation planning, just half a year earlier. The key insight, Michael explained to the international audience, is that many security incidents begin not with malicious intent, but with social isolation, mental health struggles, and the dangerous combination of technical skills with conspiracy thinking. Early intervention can redirect these individuals toward productive purposes rather than destructive ones. In the audience sat James Windsor, now promoted to corporal and serving as a liaison between British and American security forces. His insights about traditional protocol versus adaptive response had become crucial elements of the new training programs being developed. Marcus Webb was also present, though in a very different capacity than anyone might have expected. He had completed his probationary period with distinction and was now a full-time cybersecurity consultant for the British Ministry of Defence, specializing in identifying and countering online radicalization efforts. 6 months ago, I was prepared to throw my life away over theories that existed only in my imagination, Marcus said during his portion of the presentation. The difference between becoming a criminal and becoming a productive member of society came down to one person's willingness to treat me as a human being rather than just a threat. The program's success rate had been remarkable. Of the 43 individuals who had been processed through the new protocol, 38 had successfully transitioned to productive roles in various security and technology fields. Only 5 had required traditional law enforcement intervention, and none of those cases had resulted in violence or significant security breaches. Dr. Elizabeth Chen had been promoted to head the new International Crisis Intervention Initiative, a joint program between NATO countries focused on developing psychological approaches to security challenges. Her research was being studied by universities and military academies worldwide. What we learned from the Webb case, Dr. Chen explained to the gathered officials, is that the same intelligence and technical skills that can make someone dangerous can also make them incredibly valuable assets when properly channeled. Major Henley, now Lieutenant Colonel Henley, had been selected to command the first multinational unit dedicated to implementing these new protocols. Her pragmatic approach to balancing security needs with humanitarian concerns had earned respect from military leaders, who had initially been skeptical of the program. The friendship between Michael and James had evolved into a professional partnership that was reshaping how military forces approached civilian security challenges. Their joint training programs were being requested by police departments, airport security agencies, and corporate security firms. The most important thing we learned, James addressed the audience, is that sometimes the most effective weapon against a potential threat is simple human connection. Traditional show of force has its place, but understanding and redemption can achieve results that arrests and prosecutions cannot. Marcus had become an unexpected advocate for mental health awareness within the cybersecurity community. His presentations to technology conferences and university computer science departments were helping identify and assist other young people who might be following similar dangerous paths. I want people to understand that conspiracy theories and isolation don't happen overnight, Marcus explained during a recent university lecture. They develop gradually, feeding on legitimate concerns and real skills until you lose perspective on what's actually happening versus what you think is happening. The personal transformations had been as significant as the professional ones. Michael's extended stay in London had given him a new perspective on his military service. Instead of just being a warrior, he had discovered his calling as a teacher and mentor. Sarah had joined him in London after his assignment was made permanent, and their marriage had strengthened through his involvement in work that built, rather than destroyed. Their daughter Emma was planning to spend her summer internship working with Dr. Chen's research team, combining her computer science studies with practical experience in cybersecurity and psychology. James had met his future wife, Dr. Sophie Martinez, during one of the international conferences about the new protocols. She was a Spanish psychologist specializing in online radicalization, and their relationship had developed through shared passion for the work they were doing together. Marcus had reconnected with his family and was in a serious relationship with a fellow cybersecurity professional he had met through his new work. More importantly, he had become a mentor to other young people struggling with similar challenges, proving that redemption could become a foundation for helping others. The program was not without its ongoing challenges. Funding was always uncertain, political support varied between countries, and some military traditionalists continued to argue for more aggressive approaches to security threats. But the evidence was overwhelming. Communities that implemented the Thompson-Windsor Protocol experienced significant reductions in both security incidents and recidivism rates. Young people who might otherwise have become threats were being identified early and guided toward productive careers in legitimate security work. As the international conference concluded, Michael found himself reflecting on the unexpected turns his life had taken. A vacation that was supposed to be about rest and relaxation had become the foundation for the most meaningful work of his career. Standing outside the Pentagon with James and Marcus, watching delegates from dozens of countries discussing implementation plans for their program, Michael realized that sometimes the most important battles were won not through superior firepower, but through the simple recognition that every person, even potential enemies, possessed the capacity for positive change. The morning at Buckingham Palace had lasted only a few hours, but its impact would continue rippling outward for years to come, touching lives and changing perspectives in ways that none of them could have imagined when it all began with one troubled young man, one vigilant guard, and one Marine who chose compassion over conflict.